I'm Eliza, 32, and I spent 2 years saving $15,000 to surprise my parents with a dream trip to Spain. I thought their faces would light up when I presented the custom photo album at their anniversary dinner. Instead, my father cleared his throat and said, "Honey, we were thinking Megan could use this vacation more than you." My unemployed sister immediately started planning what she'd pack while I sat there, the knife of rejection twisting deeper than they could possibly understand. If you're watching this right now, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Hit that subscribe button and like this video if you've ever gone above and beyond for family, only to feel completely unappreciated. Let me know in the comments if you've experienced something similar. I read every single one. Growing up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, we were your typical middle-class family. Not poor, but my parents Robert and Linda definitely had to watch the budget. Dad worked as an electrical engineer at a local manufacturing company, and Mom was an elementary school teacher. They were hardworking people who did their best to provide for my sister Megan and me, often putting their own wants and needs aside. From an early age, it was clear that Megan and I had very different personalities. While I was independent and determined, Megan was more sensitive and required additional attention. She was 3 years younger than me, and somehow that age gap became the permanent justification for treating us differently. Even when she was well into her 20s, my parents still viewed her as the baby of the family who needed protection and support. "Eliza's so strong," my mother would often say. "She can handle anything." This became the family narrative. I was the resilient one, the one who didn't need help or special consideration. Meanwhile, Megan's every struggle was treated as a family emergency requiring all hands on deck. When I was 16, I got my first job bagging groceries at the local supermarket. I'd ride my bike there after schoolwork, my shift, then come home and do my homework. Nobody suggested I shouldn't have to work. It was just expected. When Megan turned 16, however, my parents decided she should focus on her studies and didn't push her to find employment. "Your sister isn't as organized as you are," Dad explained when I pointed out the double standard. "She'd get overwhelmed trying to balance school and work." This pattern continued into our college years. I worked 20 hours a week at the campus coffee shop while maintaining a 3.8 GPA and applying for every scholarship I could find. I still graduated with student loans, but I was proud of my self-sufficiency. Megan, on the other hand, started at Michigan State, but dropped out after 3 semesters, claiming the environment was too stressful. She moved back home and enrolled in community college, only to drop out again 6 months later. "College isn't for everyone," Mom said defensively when relatives asked about Megan's education. "She's finding her path." Finding her path meant a series of short-lived jobs. Retail positions she'd quit because the managers were unfair, receptionist roles she'd lose because she was consistently late, waitressing gigs that ended because the hours were too demanding. Each failure was met with understanding and support from my parents, who would help cover her bills until she found the next opportunity. Meanwhile, I had moved to Chicago after college, accepting an entry-level position at a marketing firm. Those first few years were tough. Living with 3 roommates in a cramped apartment, eating ramen noodles to save money, taking the bus in Chicago winters because I couldn't afford a car. But I never asked my parents for help. Not once. I'd been raised to believe that independence was expected of me. Over the years, I worked my way up in the company. Late nights, weekend work, constant upskilling. I did whatever it took. By the time I was 30, I had been promoted to senior marketing director with a team of 12 people reporting to me. After years of financial struggle, I was finally comfortable. I had my own condo in Wicker Park, a reliable car, and the ability to take vacations without counting every penny. Megan, at 29, was still living in our parents' basement. Her employment history remained spotty at best. She'd work somewhere for a few months, then quit or get fired. Each time, she'd spend weeks or months unemployed, during which my parents would cover her car payment, phone bill, and other expenses. They never asked her to pay rent. "Your sister is just going through a rough patch," Mom would say during our weekly phone calls. "This economy is so tough for young people." But it wasn't just a rough patch. It was a lifestyle. And it wasn't just the economy. Plenty of Megan's peers had found stable employment. The truth was that my sister had never been held accountable for anything, and my parents had enabled her dependence for years. Despite this frustration, I loved my parents deeply. They had worked hard all their lives, sacrificing their own dreams to raise us. Dad had always talked about wanting to see Europe, particularly Spain with its rich history and architecture. Mom would flip through travel magazines pointing out the gardens of Seville and the beaches of Barcelona. But they had never prioritized themselves enough to make such a trip happen. As my financial situation improved, I started thinking about how I could give back to them. My parents were approaching their 35th wedding anniversary, and I wanted to do something truly special. That's when the idea came to me. I would take them on their dream trip to Spain. For 2 years, I saved diligently. I cut back on luxuries, worked overtime to earn bonuses, and put aside a specific amount from each paycheck. I opened a separate savings account labeled Parents Spain Trip and watched with satisfaction as the balance grew. My goal was to create not just a vacation, but an experience they would never forget. 2 weeks exploring Barcelona, Madrid, and Seville, staying in beautiful hotels, enjoying private tours, and dining at amazing restaurants. Every time I transferred money into that savings account, I imagined the looks on their faces when I would finally reveal the surprise. I pictured us wandering through the Sagrada Familia together, sipping sangria at a plaza cafe, watching flamenco dancers perform. After all they had sacrificed for us, they deserved this magical experience. And I was proud that I could be the one to give it to them. Little did I know how drastically different the reality would be from my imagined scenario. Planning the perfect gift for my parents became something of an obsession. I wanted every detail to be special, every moment to be magical. This wasn't just a vacation, it was a thank you for everything they had done for me, a chance for them to finally prioritize themselves after decades of putting their children first. I started by researching the ideal time to visit Spain, eventually settling on early May. Perfect weather, fewer tourists than summer, and coinciding beautifully with their anniversary on May 12th. I took a day off work to meet with a travel agent who specialized in Spanish tourism, explaining that this needed to be exceptional. I want them to experience the real Spain, I told her. Not just the tourist spots, but the places where locals go, the hidden gems. Together we crafted an itinerary that balanced famous attractions with authentic experiences. 4 days in Barcelona exploring Gaudi's architecture and the Gothic Quarter. 3 days in Madrid visiting world-class museums and taking day trips to nearby medieval towns. 5 days in Seville with its stunning Alcázar Palace and vibrant flamenco culture. We even included a day trip to Granada to see the magnificent Alhambra. I opted for boutique hotels with character rather than generic international chains. In Barcelona, a restored mansion in the Example district. In Madrid, an elegant hotel overlooking the literary quarter. In Seville, a traditional house with a central courtyard filled with orange trees. Each property had been carefully selected for its combination of comfort, location, and distinctive Spanish charm. The experiences I arranged were equally thoughtful. Private guided tours with knowledgeable local experts who could bring the history to life. A cooking class where they would learn to make authentic paella. A wine tasting tour in the countryside outside Madrid. Tickets to a traditional flamenco show in Seville. Dinner reservations at restaurants ranging from Michelin-starred establishments to beloved local taverns. "This is quite the trip," the travel agent commented as we finalized the details. "Your parents are very lucky." I smiled, imagining their reaction. They deserve it. The total cost came to just over $15,000 for all three of us. A substantial sum that represented countless overtime hours and sacrificed small luxuries over 2 years. But it would be worth every penny to give my parents this experience. To present the gift, I created a custom photo album. The cover featured a collage of Spanish landmarks with the words, "Your Spanish adventure awaits," in elegant script. Inside each page showcased a different aspect of the trip. The hotels where we would stay, the sights we would see, the experiences we would share. I included little notes explaining why I had chosen each location, connecting them to comments my parents had made over the years. "Dad, remember how you always talked about wanting to see Gaudi's architecture in person? Now you finally will." "Mom, you've been cutting out pictures of Andalusian gardens for years. Wait until you see them with your own eyes." I even included practical details, information about the climate suggestions for what to pack, a few basic Spanish phrases they could practice before we left. The final page contained the actual plane tickets and a handwritten note. "Thank you for everything you've done for me. Now it's time to make your dream come true. Love, Eliza." As their anniversary approached, I purchased new luggage for them, high-quality, easy-to-maneuver suitcases that would make traveling more comfortable. I bought travel pillows adapters for European outlets and a good camera so they could document everything. No detail was too small in my quest to create the perfect experience. At work, I arranged to take 2 weeks off in May, explaining to my team that this was a special family trip I had been planning for years. Everyone was supportive, offering suggestions based on their own travels to Spain and expressing how touched they were by the gesture. "Your parents are going to be blown away," my assistant said. "This is such an incredible gift." The night before their anniversary dinner, I flew from Chicago to Grand Rapids, the new luggage and photo album carefully packed in my suitcase. I checked into a hotel near their house, wanting to maintain the surprise until the perfect moment. I could barely sleep that night, my mind racing with anticipation of their reaction. The next evening, I met my family at Bistro Bella Vita, my parents' favorite restaurant in Grand Rapids. I had arranged for a private corner table and ordered a bottle of champagne to be waiting when we arrived. Mom looked beautiful in a new dress she had bought for the occasion, and Dad was handsome in a suit that he usually only wore to weddings. I had told Megan about the dinner in advance, but not about the gift. "Wear something nice," I had instructed her. "It's their 35th anniversary, so let's make it special." She arrived 20 minutes late wearing jeans and a casual top, immediately launching into a story about how her latest job interview had gone poorly because the manager had attitude problems. "They wanted me to work weekends sometimes," she complained as she slid into her seat. "As if anyone wants to give up their weekends. It's like they don't respect work-life balance at all." I bit my tongue, choosing not to point out that many people, including our parents throughout their careers, worked weekends when necessary. This night wasn't about Megan's job struggles. It was about celebrating Mom and Dad's marriage and surprising them with a gift that would leave them speechless. Throughout dinner, I waited for the perfect moment to present my surprise. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Finally, after we had finished our desserts and the server had brought coffee, I excused myself to retrieve the photo album from my car. When I returned, I placed the carefully wrapped package on the table in front of my parents. "Happy anniversary," I said, my voice trembling slightly with excitement. "I've been planning this for a long time." As they unwrapped the gift and opened the album, their expressions shifted from curiosity to astonishment. Mom's eyes filled with tears as she turned the pages, taking in the details of the trip I had arranged. "Eliza," she whispered, I can't believe you did this." Dad seemed equally moved, studying the itinerary with wonder. "Spain. For 2 weeks. But this must have cost." "Don't worry about the cost," I said quickly. "It's all taken care of. Flights, hotels, tours, everything. It's my gift to you both. We leave on May 5th, just 3 weeks from now." For a moment, one beautiful, perfect moment, their faces shone with joy and gratitude. Mom reached across the table to squeeze my hand, and Dad looked at me with pride in his eyes. This was exactly the reaction I had dreamed of during those 2 years of saving and planning. But then, almost imperceptibly, something changed. Dad glanced at Megan, who was looking at the photo album with an unreadable expression. Mom's smile faltered slightly. They exchanged a look that I had seen many times before, a silent communication that always seemed to revolve around Megan's needs. "This is incredibly generous, sweetheart," Dad said carefully. "But well, your mother and I were talking recently about how Megan has been having such a difficult time. We were thinking she could really use a vacation to clear her head and gain some perspective." My heart sank as I began to understand where this was heading. "What your father is trying to say," Mom continued, "is that we were wondering if it might be possible for Megan to go on this trip instead of you. You're doing so well in Chicago with your career, and Megan could really use something positive right now." The restaurant seemed to fall silent around us. I could feel the blood draining from my face as I struggled to process what I was hearing. They wanted to take my sister instead of me. On the trip I had spent 2 years planning and saving for. The trip that was meant to be my gift to them. Are you serious? I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Don't take it personally, Eliza, Megan interjected, already flipping through the album with newfound interest. You can go to Spain anytime with your big marketing salary. I've never even been out of the country. This looks amazing, she continued, either oblivious to or unconcerned with my distress. Do I need a passport? I should probably buy some new clothes for the trip. Do people dress fancy in Spain? I sat in stunned silence as my sister rambled on about swimsuits and sunglasses, my parents nodding encouragingly at her sudden enthusiasm. The gift I had poured my heart into, the meaningful experiences I had carefully selected, the special moments I had imagined sharing with them, was being casually redistributed without a second thought. I need some air, I said abruptly, standing up from the table. I walked outside on unsteady legs, the cool evening air doing little to clear the fog of hurt and disbelief clouding my mind. Through the restaurant window, I could see them still gathered around the table looking at the photo album. Megan was animatedly pointing at something, and my parents were smiling indulgently. Not one of them had followed me outside to check if I was okay. In that moment, standing alone on the sidewalk, I realized that this wasn't just about a trip to Spain. It was about a lifetime of patterns I had accepted as normal, but were anything but. It was about being valued only for what I could provide, never for who I was. It was about a family dynamic that had been broken for far longer than I had been willing to admit. I took several deep breaths of the cool evening air, trying to steady myself before returning to the table. A server exiting the restaurant gave me a concerned look, but didn't say anything. I must have looked as devastated as I felt. After composing myself as best I could, I walked back inside, determined to address what had just happened. My family barely noticed my return. Megan was holding the album open to the page about Barcelona, talking excitedly about Gaudi's architecture, as if she had any prior interest in it. My father was calculating dates on his phone calendar, while my mother nodded along to Megan's chatter. So, I said, my voice unnaturally calm as I sat down. Can we talk about what just happened? There was an awkward pause as they finally registered my presence and the tension in my voice. Honey, my mother began in the soothing tone she always used when she thought I was being too sensitive. We're just trying to do what's best for the family. The family, I repeated. And I'm not part of that. Of course you are, Dad interjected quickly. But you have to understand, Megan's in a really vulnerable place right now. This trip could be exactly what she needs to get back on her feet. And what about what I need? I asked, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. I spent 2 years saving for this trip. 2 years planning every detail to make it special for us to experience together. Megan rolled her eyes, a gesture so dismissive it made my blood boil. Don't be so dramatic, Eliza. It's just a vacation. It's not just a vacation, I said, turning to look directly at her. It's a $15,000 gift that I worked overtime for, that I sacrificed for. It's a gift with meaning behind every single choice. Hotels I selected because Dad always talked about staying in historic buildings, tours I booked because Mom has been interested in Spanish art since college. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances, perhaps finally realizing the extent of thought and resources I had put into this gift. $15,000, my father repeated, his eyebrows shooting up. Eliza, that's far too much. We had no idea. Would it have made a difference if you had known? I asked quietly. Or would you still be giving my gift to Megan? My mother reached across the table to pat my hand. Sweetheart, we appreciate your generosity, we really do. But you can afford this kind of trip. Megan can't. And right now she needs something positive in her life. And what about what I need? I asked again, pulling my hand away. Has it occurred to either of you that maybe I've been looking forward to spending time with you? That maybe I need my parents too sometimes? You've always been so independent, Mom said, as if this justified everything. So capable and strong. Megan needs more support. Megan has been getting more support her entire life, I replied, the hurt in my chest transforming into anger. When was the last time either of you supported me? When was the last time my accomplishments weren't overshadowed by whatever crisis Megan was having? That's not fair, Dad protested, though there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Isn't it? I challenged. When I graduated with honors from Northwestern, you both left my ceremony early because Megan called crying about a fight with her boyfriend. When I got my first big promotion, the celebration dinner turned into a strategy session for helping Megan after she got fired from the mall. Every milestone in my life has been minimized because Megan always needs attention more urgently. Megan scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. It's not my fault you're jealous of the relationship I have with Mom and Dad. I'm not jealous, I said, turning to face her. I'm hurt. There's a difference. And I'm tired of being taken for granted by all of you. Just then, Megan's phone buzzed with a notification. Without a moment's hesitation, she picked it up and started texting, effectively removing herself from the uncomfortable conversation. This small action, so typical of her avoidance of anything difficult, suddenly struck me as the perfect encapsulation of our family dynamic. You know what? I said, reaching for my purse. I need to go. I can't do this right now. Eliza, please, my father said finally, seeming to realize how upset I was. Let's talk about this reasonably. I've been reasonable my entire life, I replied, standing up. I've accepted being treated differently than Megan. I've accepted being expected to be independent while she gets endless support. I've accepted that my accomplishments will never get the same attention as her struggles. But this? I gestured to the photo album now carelessly open on the table. This is too much. I won't accept this. You're overreacting, my mother said, her tone hardening. This is exactly the kind of materialism we didn't raise you with. It's just a trip. Her words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I had shared about my feelings, all she took from it was that I was being materialistic. It was never about the money, I said quietly. It was about creating something special for the three of us to share. But clearly that's not something you value. I left enough cash on the table to cover my portion of the dinner and walked out, ignoring my father calling my name. The drive to my hotel was a blur, tears streaming down my face as I replayed the conversation in my mind. Once in my hotel room, I collapsed onto the bed, emotionally exhausted. My phone began buzzing with texts and calls from my parents, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What more was there to say? They had made their choice, and it wasn't me. It had never been me. Around midnight, a text from Megan came through. Don't be mad at Mom and Dad. They're just trying to help me. Besides, you can afford to take them on another trip sometime. I'm thinking I might need a new swimsuit for Spain. Do you think I could borrow some money for that? I stared at the message in disbelief. After everything that had happened that evening, she was asking me for money to buy clothes for the trip that should have been mine. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. Instead of responding, I turned off my phone completely. I had an early flight back to Chicago the next morning, and I had no desire to continue this conversation with any of them. What was supposed to be a joyful celebration had turned into a painful revelation about my place in my family. Always the giver, never the receiver. Always the afterthought, never the priority. As I lay in the dark hotel room, I made a decision. I would return to Chicago tomorrow and cancel the trip arrangements. They could make their own plans if they wanted to go to Spain with Megan. I was done sacrificing for people who couldn't see my worth beyond what I could provide for them. I fell into a restless sleep, my dreams filled with images of Spanish landscapes I would never see with my parents, of moments of connection that would never happen. When I woke early the next morning, the hurt hadn't subsided, but it had crystallized into a cold, clear resolve. Something had to change, not just about the trip, but about my entire relationship with my family. Back in Chicago, I threw myself into work with a vengeance. 14-hour days, working through weekends, volunteering for every challenging project that came up. If my colleagues noticed the sudden intensity, they didn't comment on it directly, though I caught concerned glances from time to time. Are you sure you want to take on the Hartman pitch? My assistant Casey asked when I added it to my already overflowing plate. The timeline is brutal and you're already leading 3 major campaigns. I can handle it, I said with the automatic confidence that had been my shield since childhood. Strong, capable Eliza never needed help, never struggled, never cracked under pressure. The truth was that work had always been my escape. At the office, success was directly correlated to effort. Hard work was recognized and rewarded. Competence was valued. Everything operated according to clear, fair rules, the opposite of my family dynamics. Meanwhile, my phone continued to accumulate messages from my parents. At first, they were defensive. "We're disappointed in how you reacted at dinner. After everything we've done for you, we thought you'd be more understanding of your sister's needs." Then came the guilt trips. "Your father couldn't sleep last night. Is this really how you want to leave things between us?" Finally, they moved to reconciliation attempts. "We should sit down as a family and discuss this calmly. We love you both equally, Eliza." I read each message but couldn't bring myself to respond. What was there to say? They had made it abundantly clear where their priorities lay, and I wasn't at the top of the list. I needed time to process not just what had happened at the anniversary dinner, but what it revealed about our entire family relationship. Megan's messages were less frequent and even less sensitive. "Mom and Dad are really upset. You should call them. I need to know if the hotels have pools. Can you send me the details? Are you still mad? Seriously, it's just a vacation." Her inability to understand or acknowledge my feelings only reinforced my decision to maintain distance. The first week after returning to Chicago, I contacted the travel agent to cancel all the arrangements. She was surprised and concerned. "This was such a carefully planned trip," she said. "Is everything okay?" "Plans change," I replied tersely. "How much of the deposit can I get back?" Because many of the bookings had been non-refundable to secure the best rates, I lost nearly $3,000 in cancellation fees. Another blow, but at this point the money seemed secondary to the emotional cost of the whole situation. My parents called repeatedly when they received the cancellation notices from the travel agent. I let the calls go to voicemail, not ready to hear their voices. My father's message was particularly difficult to listen to. "Eliza, what have you done? We were hoping to work this out. Please call us back so we can fix this as a family." Fix what exactly? The trip, or the years of unequal treatment that had led to this breaking point? By the second week, my frantic work pace began to take its toll. I started making small mistakes, forgetting details in meetings, missing deadlines I would normally hit with ease. The lack of sleep and emotional turmoil were affecting my performance, and I knew it. My closest friend in Chicago, Jamie, finally cornered me after a particularly rough day when I'd snapped at a junior team member, something I had never done before. "Okay, that's it," she said, appearing in my office doorway at 7 p.m. "We're going to dinner and you're going to tell me what the hell is going on with you." I started to make an excuse about needing to finish a presentation, but Jamie wasn't having it. "The presentation can wait. You look like you haven't slept in days. You've been wearing the same 3 outfits on rotation and you just made Brendan nearly cry in the creative meeting. This isn't you, Eliza." She was right. I grabbed my coat and followed her to a small Italian restaurant a few blocks from the office. Once we were settled with glasses of wine, Jamie fixed me with her no-nonsense stare. "Spill it. All of it." And so I did. I told her about the 2 years of planning and saving, about the carefully curated experiences I had arranged, about the excited anticipation I had felt leading up to the reveal. And then I told her about my parents' request to take Megan instead, about their dismissal of my feelings, about the realization that I had always been valued primarily for what I could provide, rather than for who I was. By the time I finished, tears were streaming down my face, and Jamie was holding my hand across the table. "Oh, Eliza," she said softly. "I'm so sorry. That's incredibly painful." "Am I overreacting?" I asked, voicing the doubt that had been nagging at me despite my hurt. "My mother seems to think so." Jamie shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. What they did was extremely hurtful and dismissive. They took your incredibly thoughtful gift and treated it like a transferable ticket they could just reassign to your sister." She took a sip of her wine, considering her next words carefully. "But from what you've told me about your family over the years, this isn't really surprising, is it? This seems like part of a much larger pattern." "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Every story you tell about your family has the same dynamic. Your sister needs something, and everyone drops everything to provide it. You achieve something and it gets overshadowed by whatever drama Megan is creating. You're expected to be self-sufficient while she's allowed to be perpetually dependent. Hearing it laid out so plainly by someone outside the situation made the pattern impossible to ignore. Jamie wasn't telling me anything I didn't already know on some level, but having it confirmed by an objective observer somehow made it more real. The question is, Jamie continued gently, what are you going to do about it now? Because this work martyr thing you've got going isn't sustainable and it's not addressing the real issue. I wiped my eyes with my napkin. I don't know. Part of me wants to just cut them off completely. Another part feels guilty for even thinking that. Those aren't the only options, Jamie pointed out. There's a middle ground between total estrangement and continuing to accept being treated this way. What's that? Boundaries, she said simply. Clear, firm boundaries about what you will and won't accept from them, about how you expect to be treated, about the kind of relationship you want to have going forward. The word boundaries resonated with something deep inside me. Throughout my life, I had never established clear boundaries with my family. I had accepted whatever they gave, accommodated whatever they asked, swallowed whatever hurt I felt, all in the name of being the strong one, the easy one, the one who didn't cause problems. I wouldn't even know where to start, I admitted. Jamie smiled kindly. That's what therapists are for. The suggestion caught me off guard. Therapy wasn't something my family believed in. Problems were to be handled privately, emotions kept in check, difficulties overcome through sheer willpower. The idea of talking to a professional about my family issues felt almost like a betrayal of those unspoken rules. But then again, those unspoken rules had led me here, exhausted, emotionally drained, and disconnected from the people who should have been my strongest supporters. I think that might be a good idea, I said finally. Jamie looked relieved. I can give you the name of the therapist I saw after my divorce. She's fantastic with family issues. By the time we left the restaurant, I felt lighter than I had in weeks, not because anything had been resolved with my family, but because I had finally voiced the hurt I'd been carrying and made a decision to address it proactively rather than burying myself in work. The next day, I called Dr. Morgan's office and scheduled an appointment for the following week. That evening, I sent a brief text to my parents. I need some time and space to process what happened. I'll reach out when I'm ready to talk. It wasn't much, but it was the first boundary I had ever set with them. The first time I had prioritized my own emotional needs over their expectations. It was a small step, but an important one on what I was beginning to realize would be a long journey toward a healthier relationship with my family, and perhaps more importantly with myself. My first session with Dr. Morgan was more difficult than I had anticipated. Her office was warm and inviting with comfortable seating and soft lighting, but I felt awkward and exposed sitting across from her, unsure of where to begin or how much to share. "Why don't you tell me what brought you here today?" she suggested, her voice gentle but professional. I started with the Spain trip, explaining the situation as objectively as I could, trying to present both my perspective and my family's. But as I spoke, the emotions I had been suppressing bubbled to the surface. Hurt, anger, disappointment, a lifetime of feeling secondary in my parents' affections, despite doing everything right. "It sounds like this incident with the trip was a breaking point," Dr. Morgan observed when I finally ran out of words. "The proverbial straw that broke the camel's back." I nodded, dabbing at my eyes with a tissue. It just made everything so clear. I've spent my whole life trying to earn their approval, their attention, their pride, and it's never been enough. Megan will always come first no matter what I do. "Tell me more about these family dynamics," she encouraged. "How far back can you trace this pattern?" Over the next hour, I shared stories from throughout my childhood and young adulthood. Moments when Megan's needs had automatically trumped mine. Times when my accomplishments had been glossed over in favor of addressing my sister's latest crisis. The constant expectation that I would be understanding, accommodating, and self-sufficient, while Megan received endless support and second chances. "It sounds like your family has fallen into what we call rigid roles," Dr. Morgan explained. "You've been cast as the responsible one, while your sister is the needy one. These roles become self-reinforcing over time. The more responsible you are, the more your parents expect you to be self-sufficient. The more your sister struggles, the more they rush to her aid. But why? I asked, frustrated. Why would they treat their children so differently? Family systems are complex, she replied thoughtfully. Sometimes parents unconsciously give more attention to the child they perceive as weaker or more vulnerable. It doesn't mean they love that child more, but they may feel the more capable child doesn't need them as much. So I'm being punished for being capable. I asked the unfairness of it, making my chest tight. Not punished exactly, Dr. Morgan clarified. But family systems often develop these imbalances without anyone consciously choosing them. The question now is, what do you want your relationship with your family to look like going forward? It was a question I had never really considered before. I had always accepted the relationship as it was adapting myself to fit their expectations, rather than considering what I needed or wanted from them. I don't know, I admitted. I just know I can't keep doing what I've been doing. I can't keep giving and giving only to be taken for granted. That's a good place to start, Dr. Morgan nodded. For our next session, I'd like you to think about what boundaries would look like for you. What behaviors from your family are you no longer willing to accept? What would respect look like in your relationship with them? She also suggested a therapeutic exercise, writing unsent letters to each family member, expressing my true feelings without the filtering I typically employed in our interactions. Don't hold back, she advised. These letters are for your eyes only. They're a way for you to access and process emotions you may have been suppressing for years. I left that first session feeling emotionally drained but somehow lighter, as if naming the dysfunctional patterns had already begun to loosen their hold on me. Over the next few weeks, I continued seeing Dr. Morgan regularly, gradually unpacking the complex family dynamics that had shaped my self-image and relationships. The unsent letters proved particularly revelatory. When I allowed myself to write without restraint, feelings I hadn't even acknowledged came pouring out. Not just hurt and disappointment, but also anger and resentment that I had buried beneath a lifetime of being the understanding one. To my father, I wrote about feeling betrayed by his failure to stand up for me at the dinner, about the subtle favoritism he had shown Megan throughout our lives, about my yearning for his approval, and the pain of realizing it would always be conditional on my usefulness. To my mother, I expressed my anger at being taken for granted, at having my feelings dismissed as overreacting, at being valued more for what I could provide than for who I was as a person. To Megan, I wrote about the frustration of watching her receive endless support while being expected to fend for myself, about the hurt of having my gift to our parents casually appropriated without a second thought, about my resentment of her inability to see beyond her own needs. Reading these letters afterward was painful, but clarifying. They helped me understand that my hurt went far deeper than the Spain trip incident. It was rooted in a lifetime of imbalanced family dynamics that had left me feeling perpetually secondary. Meanwhile, my parents continued reaching out. Their messages grew increasingly concerned as the weeks passed without a response from me. My father called my office once, something he had never done before, leaving a message with my assistant that he was worried about me. Megan's communications were less frequent and focused primarily on her own concerns. Complaints about not being able to go to Spain after all updates on her latest job interview failures, occasional questions about whether I was still mad. As Easter approached, the pressure intensified. It was a holiday we had always spent together as a family, and my mother made it clear she expected this year to be no different. "We need to put this unpleasantness behind us," she wrote in a text. "Family should be together for holidays." In my therapy sessions, Dr. Morgan and I discussed how to handle the invitation. Part of me wanted to refuse outright to continue the distance that had been providing me space to process my feelings. Another part feared that declining would escalate the situation into a full family crisis, potentially damaging relationships beyond repair. "Perhaps this is an opportunity," Dr. Morgan suggested. "A chance to practice setting boundaries in person rather than through distance." "I'm not sure I'm ready for that," I admitted. "I'm still figuring out what those boundaries even are." "That's understandable," she assured me. But consider this: avoidance, while sometimes necessary for healing, doesn't ultimately resolve the underlying issues. At some point, direct communication will be needed if you want to build a healthier relationship with your family. We spent the next 2 sessions preparing for the potential family gathering, identifying specific boundaries I wanted to establish, practicing responses to predictable patterns, developing strategies for maintaining emotional equilibrium when triggered. Remember, Dr. Morgan emphasized, you can't control how they respond to your boundaries. You can only control your own actions and reactions. After careful consideration, I decided to attend Easter dinner at my parents' house. Not out of obligation or habit, but as a conscious choice to begin addressing the dysfunctional patterns directly, rather than through avoidance. I called my mother to accept the invitation, keeping the conversation brief and factual. I'll be there for dinner, but I'll need to leave by 7 for my flight back to Chicago. Oh. She sounded surprised perhaps by both my acceptance and my time limitation. We were hoping you might stay the night. It's been so long since we've had a proper visit. That doesn't work with my schedule, I replied firmly, practicing the boundary setting we had discussed in therapy. I can be there from 2 to 7. There was a pause before she responded. Well, I suppose that's better than nothing. In the past, that guilt-inducing comment would have prompted me to rearrange my plans, prioritizing her preferences over my needs. This time, I simply acknowledged it without yielding. Those are the hours I'm available. Should I bring anything for dinner? It was a small interaction, but it felt significant. I had stated my boundary clearly and maintained it despite the subtle pressure to conform to her expectations. It was a preview of the more difficult conversations to come, but it gave me confidence that I could navigate them without either capitulating or escalating unnecessarily. As the Easter gathering approached, I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. This would be my first time seeing my family since the disastrous anniversary dinner. It would be challenging, potentially uncomfortable, and almost certainly emotional. But it would also be an opportunity to begin reshaping our relationship into something healthier, not just for them, but for me. The drive from my hotel to my parents' house on Easter Sunday felt longer than usual, each familiar landmark triggering memories of the family dynamics I was now seeing through new eyes. The neighborhood hadn't changed. The same well-maintained homes with neatly trimmed lawns, the same church where we had attended services throughout my childhood, the same park where Dad had taught Megan and me to ride bikes. But I had changed, and that made everything look different. I parked in the driveway behind Megan's car, a recent model that I knew our parents had helped her finance, and sat for a moment gathering my thoughts. In my purse was a small notebook where I had jotted down some of the key points I wanted to express if the opportunity for a meaningful conversation arose. Dr. Morgan had suggested this as a tool to help me stay focused when emotions ran high. Taking a deep breath, I approached the front door. Before I could ring the bell, it swung open to reveal my mother dressed in a floral spring dress with an anxious smile. "Eliza," she said, reaching out to hug me. "We've missed you so much." I accepted the hug, but kept it brief, already noting how she had framed my absence as something I had done to them, rather than a necessary space I had needed for myself. Small reframing like this had been happening my entire life, I now realized. Subtle shifts that placed responsibility on me for maintaining family harmony, regardless of how I was treated. "Hi, Mom," I said, stepping into the house. The familiar scent of her traditional Easter ham and scalloped potatoes filled the air. "How are you?" "Better now that you're here," she replied, leading me toward the living room. "Your father's been so worried. We both have." Again, the emphasis on their feelings, rather than any concern for what I might have been experiencing. It was a pattern Dr. Morgan had helped me identify, the expectation that I would prioritize their emotional comfort over my own needs. My father rose from his recliner when I entered the room, his expression a mixture of relief and wariness. "There she is," he said, attempting heartiness that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Our Chicago executive." "Hi, Dad," I replied, accepting his somewhat stiff hug. "Happy Easter." Megan was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up briefly. "Hey, you're actually here. Thought you might bail." I said I would come, I replied evenly, choosing not to engage with her provocative tone. The first hour was filled with careful small talk, questions about my work that didn't delve too deep, updates on extended family members' discussion of the unseasonably warm spring weather. My parents seemed determined to maintain a veneer of normalcy, as if the anniversary dinner incident had been a minor misunderstanding rather than a revealing fracture in our family foundation. Megan unsurprisingly dominated much of the conversation with detailed accounts of her latest job hunting woes. The interviewer clearly had it in for me from the start, she complained about her most recent rejection. Asked all these trick questions about handling difficult customers, like how am I supposed to know that when I haven't even started the job yet? I caught my father's eye during this monologue and noticed something I hadn't seen before, a flicker of weariness quickly masked with his usual supportive nod. Was it possible that he too sometimes found Megan's perpetual victim narrative tiresome? It was a new thought, one that complicated my understanding of the family dynamics. During dinner, my mother made a point of serving me first, a reversal of the usual pattern where Megan's preferences were prioritized. This transparent attempt to show that I wasn't being treated differently only highlighted how aware they were of the preferential treatment they typically showed my sister. I made your favorite scalloped potatoes with the extra cheese on top, Mom said, placing a generous portion on my plate. And I remembered you like the ham with the maple glaze. Thank you, I said, recognizing the gesture for what it was. An olive branch offered without the more difficult work of acknowledging the underlying issues. Conversation around the dinner table remained superficial until Megan, perhaps bored with the careful avoidance of anything substantive, decided to broach the subject of Spain. So, she said, reaching for another roll, since the Spain trip got canceled, I've been thinking maybe we could do something smaller, like maybe a weekend in Chicago. You could show us around your fancy neighborhood, take us to some nice restaurants. She looked at me expectantly. That wouldn't be as expensive as Spain, right? The audacity was breathtaking. After everything that had happened, she was still viewing me primarily as a source of financial support and experiences she couldn't provide for herself. My parents shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware that this was dangerous territory. Megan, maybe now isn't the time, my father began. Actually, I interrupted, setting down my fork deliberately. I think now is exactly the time. We've been dancing around this issue since I arrived, and I'd rather address it directly. My mother looked alarmed. Eliza, it's Easter. Can't we just enjoy a nice family dinner without rehashing unpleasantness? That's part of the problem, I said quietly but firmly. The expectation that I should set aside my feelings to maintain a superficial harmony. That's a pattern I'm no longer willing to participate in. The table fell silent. This direct acknowledgement of conflict was unusual in our family, where difficult emotions were typically smoothed over rather than confronted. After dinner, my father suggested, his tone conciliatory. We can talk privately after dinner. I considered this offer. On one hand, it might be easier to have a meaningful conversation without the additional complication of Megan's presence. On the other hand, she was an integral part of the dynamic that needed addressing. That would be fine. I agreed, deciding that a partial conversation was better than none. But Megan, to answer your question directly, no, I won't be hosting or financing a Chicago weekend for the family. That's not a relationship dynamic I'm comfortable with anymore. Megan's face flushed with indignation. Wow, success really has changed you. Suddenly you're too good to share with your family. It's not about being too good, I replied, maintaining a calm tone despite the provocation. It's about recognizing patterns that aren't healthy for any of us, including you. What's that supposed to mean? She demanded. It means, I said carefully, that constantly being positioned as the provider, while you're positioned as the recipient, creates an imbalance that undermines our ability to relate as equals. It's not good for either of us. My mother interjected, her voice tight with anxiety. Eliza, please. Your sister is going through a difficult time. There's no need to make her feel worse. And there it was, the reflexive protection of Megan's feelings at the expense of mine. Even now, when I was calmly expressing a boundary rather than attacking, the priority was shielding Megan from discomfort. I'm not trying to make anyone feel worse, I said. I'm trying to communicate honestly about a pattern that's been harmful to our family relationships. The remainder of dinner was tense with conversation, limited to requests to pass dishes and half-hearted compliments on the food. As soon as the meal concluded, Megan announced she was going to her room to call a friend, clearly eager to escape the uncomfortable atmosphere. Once she was gone, my father suggested we move to the sunroom at the back of the house, a more private space for the conversation that could no longer be avoided. I helped clear the dishes, noticing my mother's rigid posture and tightly controlled movements that signaled her distress at the disruption of her carefully orchestrated family gathering. In the sunroom, with spring sunlight streaming through the windows and the distant sound of neighborhood children hunting Easter eggs in nearby yards, we finally began the conversation that was long overdue. I took a seat in a wicker chair across from my parents on the small sofa, feeling both nervous and resolute. I've been seeing a therapist. I began deciding transparency was the best approach, working through some issues related to our family dynamics. My mother's lips thinned slightly at the mention of therapy. She had always viewed seeking outside help as somehow shameful a failure to handle one's problems privately. My father, however, nodded slowly. "That's probably a good idea," he said, surprising me. "This situation has clearly affected you deeply." "It's not just about the Spain trip," I continued, grateful for his relatively open response. "Though that was certainly a breaking point. It's about a pattern that's existed in our family for as long as I can remember." "What pattern?" my mother asked defensively. "We've always treated both our daughters with love." "I know you love us both," I acknowledged. "I've never doubted that. But there's been a consistent imbalance in how that love is expressed. Megan receives unconditional support, endless chances, and constant attention. I receive approval conditional on achievement expectations of self-sufficiency and attention only when I'm providing something useful." My father shifted uncomfortably. "That's not how we see it at all." "I understand that," I said. "I don't think this was ever intentional or conscious, but intention doesn't change impact, and the impact has been painful." "We've always been proud of you," my mother insisted. "You've never needed the kind of support Megan does. You've always been so capable, so independent." "I became independent because I had to," I pointed out gently. "Because from an early age I understood that Megan's needs would always come first, that my role was to be the easy one, the one who didn't cause problems." A heavy silence followed this observation. My father looked down at his hands while my mother blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "We never meant to make you feel less important," Dad finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "We just thought you were doing so well. You didn't seem to need us the way Megan did." "Everyone needs support," I replied. "Everyone needs to feel valued for who they are, not just for what they achieve or provide." "What are you saying, Eliza?" my mother asked, a note of fear in her voice. "That we've been terrible parents, that you want to cut us off?" "No," I assured her. "That's not what I want at all. I want a healthier relationship with both of you, one where my feelings and needs are given the same consideration as Megan's, where I'm not expected to always understand, always accommodate, always give without receiving." "And how do we do that?" my father asked, sounding genuinely uncertain but willing, a small victory in itself. "It starts with acknowledgement," I said, "with recognizing the pattern rather than denying it exists. And then it continues with conscious efforts to change it, to be more balanced in how you respond to both your daughters." My mother wiped away a tear that had escaped despite her efforts. "I don't think we ever realized. We were just trying to respond to what each of you seemed to need." "I know," I said softly. "And I'm not asking for perfect equality in every interaction. I'm asking for awareness and effort, for my feelings to matter as much as Megan's, for my boundaries to be respected even when they're inconvenient." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, with moments of defensive pushback interspersed with genuine reflection. There were no dramatic breakthroughs or tearful group hugs like in a movie resolution. Real family healing, I was learning, was messier and more gradual, a series of small steps rather than a single transformative moment. By the time I needed to leave for my flight, we had reached a fragile understanding. My parents had acknowledged, however reluctantly, that there had been an imbalance in how they treated their daughters. They had expressed willingness, however uncertainly, to work on changing those patterns. And I had maintained my boundaries while also opening myself to the possibility of a new, healthier family dynamic. As my father helped me carry my overnight bag to the car, he paused in the driveway. "I am proud of you, Eliza," he said quietly. "Not just for your success, but for your courage in speaking up about this. It couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," I admitted, "but it was necessary." "I'm sorry about the Spain trip," he added. "That was wrong of us. I see that now." It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a start. As I drove away, glancing in the rearview mirror at my parents standing in the driveway, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: lingering hurt, cautious hope, and a new sense of personal power that came from finally advocating for myself. The family patterns of a lifetime wouldn't change overnight. There would be setbacks, moments of regression, old habits reasserting themselves. But something fundamental had shifted, not just in how my parents saw me, but in how I saw myself. No longer just the reliable daughter who could be counted on to understand and accommodate, but a woman with valid needs, feelings, and boundaries worthy of respect. The months following Easter marked a period of careful rebuilding in my relationship with my family. Like a house with a damaged foundation, we couldn't simply patch over the surface cracks. We needed to address the underlying structural issues before anything new could be safely constructed. Communication with my parents became more regular, but also more intentional. Our weekly phone calls now included direct discussions about family dynamics rather than surface-level updates and Megan-centered crisis management. When old patterns emerged, my mother asking me to help solve one of Megan's problems, for instance, I would gently but firmly redirect the conversation. "I'm happy to listen, Mom, but Megan needs to handle her own challenges. I can't be her backup plan or safety net anymore." These boundaries weren't always well received initially. There were sighs, tense silences, and occasional accusations that I had changed, as if my unwillingness to continue unhealthy patterns was somehow a personality flaw rather than a sign of growth. "You used to be so understanding," my mother commented during one difficult conversation when I declined to lend Megan money for car repairs. "She's really struggling right now." "I'm still understanding," I replied calmly. "But understanding doesn't mean I have to solve problems that aren't mine to solve. Megan is 29 years old. She needs to build her own financial stability." My father, somewhat surprisingly, adapted more quickly to the new dynamic. During a phone call in late June, he shared a revelation that suggested he was genuinely reflecting on his parenting approach. "I was thinking about what you said about us treating you and Megan differently," he began hesitantly. "And I realized something. We may have done Megan a disservice all these years, always jumping in to rescue her. Maybe if we had expected more from her like we did from you, she would have developed more resilience." It was an insight that had never occurred to me, that the preferential treatment that had hurt me might simultaneously have stunted Megan's growth. The realization added a new dimension to my understanding of our family system. My relationship with Megan herself remained the most challenging to navigate. Unlike our parents, who had at least acknowledged the need for change, Megan seemed determined to maintain the status quo, where her needs and struggles took precedence over everything else. "You've become so selfish since you moved to Chicago," she complained during one of our infrequent phone conversations. "It's like you don't even care about family anymore." "I care deeply about family," I corrected her. "But I've realized that healthy family relationships need to be reciprocal. They can't just be one person constantly giving while another constantly takes." "What is that supposed to mean?" she demanded, though I suspected she understood perfectly well. "It means I love you as my sister, but I'm no longer available to be your financial backup or emotional support system. Those are roles you need to develop for yourself." Her response was to hang up on me, followed by a week of silence, and then a text asking if she could borrow my streaming service password, because she was really broke right now. The message so perfectly encapsulated our dysfunctional dynamic that I almost laughed despite the sadness underlying it. While working on these family relationships, I continued my therapy sessions with Dr. Morgan processing the complex emotions that arose as I established and maintained boundaries. Sometimes I felt guilty for causing disruption in the family system, even though intellectually I understood the disruption was necessary for healing. Other times I felt angry that the burden of initiating change had fallen entirely on me, rather than being shared by those who had created and perpetuated the unhealthy patterns. Both reactions are normal, Dr. Morgan assured me. Change is difficult for everyone involved, and it's common to experience ambivalence, even when you know you're making healthy choices. One particularly significant moment in my therapy journey came when Dr. Morgan asked me to consider what I wanted for myself beyond the family healing process. You've been so focused on addressing the family dynamics that I wonder if you've given much thought to what would bring you joy and fulfillment independently of those relationships. The question caught me off guard. For so long, my identity had been shaped by my role in the family and my professional achievements. The idea of pursuing something solely for my own satisfaction seemed almost foreign. After reflection, I realized that I had always wanted to travel, not just to provide experiences for others as with the Spain trip, but to explore and discover for myself. The thought of planning a trip that was entirely about my own interests and desires felt both exciting and slightly transgressive, given my lifelong habit of prioritizing others' needs. I think I want to take a solo trip, I told Dr. Morgan in our next session. Somewhere I've always wanted to go just for me. That sounds like a wonderful form of self-care, she encouraged. Where are you thinking of going? I had been considering this carefully. Portugal, I decided. It's close to Spain but different, less familiar to most tourists. It would be my own discovery not tied to the family drama. Over the next few weeks, I channeled the same meticulous planning energy that had gone into the Spain trip, but this time focused entirely on my own interests and preferences. I researched boutique hotels in Lisbon's historic districts, wine tours in the Douro Valley, cooking classes featuring traditional Portuguese cuisine. Each decision was made based solely on what appealed to me, a novel and surprisingly liberating experience. When I mentioned the planned trip to my parents during our weekly call, I noticed a subtle but important difference in their reaction compared to how they might have responded in the past. "That sounds wonderful, Eliza," my mother said with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm rather than the veiled disapproval she might once have expressed about me spending money on myself. "Portugal is supposed to be beautiful," my father added. "Will you send us pictures?" It was a small thing, this expression of interest in my experiences without attempting to redirect the conversation to Megan's needs or suggesting I should include other family members. But it represented progress, a gradual shift toward seeing me as an individual with my own valid desires, rather than merely as a provider for others. As summer turned to fall, the changes in our family dynamic became more established, though not without occasional backsliding. My mother still sometimes slipped into asking me to help solve Megan's problems, but now caught herself midway. "I'm doing it again, aren't I? Making Megan your responsibility." My father had begun having more direct conversations with Megan about financial independence, encouraging her to maintain steady employment rather than quitting jobs at the first sign of difficulty. It wasn't an easy process for any of them, but it was necessary growth. Megan herself remained the most resistant to change, alternating between angry accusations that I had turned our parents against her and attempts to reestablish the old dynamic where I would provide solutions to her problems. But even she was slowly beginning to understand that the family system had permanently shifted. In October, 6 months after that revelatory Easter conversation, I boarded a plane to Lisbon for my 2-week solo adventure in Portugal. As the aircraft took off, I felt a profound sense of liberation, not just from physical distance from the family issues, but from the psychological weight of always putting others' needs before my own. The trip was everything I had hoped for and more. I wandered the narrow streets of Alfama, listening to the haunting sounds of fado music drifting from small restaurants. I sampled port wine in centuries-old cellars along the Douro River. I sat in cafes, writing in my journal, processing the journey I had been on, not just the physical journey through Portugal, but the emotional journey of the past 6 months. One evening, sitting on a terrace overlooking the Atlantic Ocean as the sun set, I wrote, "I've spent so much of my life trying to earn love through achievement and sacrifice. I thought if I was successful enough, generous enough, understanding enough, I would finally receive the unconditional acceptance I craved. But that's not how love works. Real love doesn't demand that you diminish yourself to prove your worth. Real love creates space for you to be fully yourself, with all your needs and boundaries intact. I don't know exactly what my relationship with my family will look like going forward. I'm sure there will be continued challenges as we all adjust to healthier patterns. But I do know that I won't go back to accepting less than I deserve. I won't go back to being valued only for what I can provide rather than for who I am." The Spain trip that never happened was painful, but it was also a gift in disguise, the catalyst that finally pushed me to address patterns that had been hurting me for years. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for others, is to stand firm in your worth and refuse to participate in dynamics that diminish it. As I flew back to Chicago, I carried with me not just souvenirs from Portugal, but a newfound confidence in my ability to advocate for myself, to set and maintain boundaries, and to build relationships based on mutual respect, rather than one-sided accommodation. The family healing process would continue with progress and setbacks, breakthroughs, and challenges. But something fundamental had changed, not just in how my family saw me, but in how I saw myself. No longer the perpetual giver whose worth was measured by what she could provide, but a whole person deserving of love and consideration simply for being who I was. The Spain trip that never happened had ultimately led me to a different kind of journey, one of self-discovery and personal growth that no luxury vacation could have provided. And for that unexpected gift, despite all the pain that came with it, I was genuinely grateful. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with family members who took you for granted? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our stories helps others feel less alone in similar situations. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to join our community of people supporting each other through life's challenges. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this journey, share this video with them. It might be exactly what they need to hear today. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, valuing yourself isn't selfish. It's the foundation of all healthy relationships.